Hello and welcome to another Jacana Media virtual book launch in partnership with BirdLife South Africa. My name is Dr. Melissa Whitecross, and for those of you who do not know me, I am the Landscape Conservation Program Manager at BirdLife South Africa. Tonight, I am thrilled to have the opportunity to converse with Dr. Bruce McKenzie about his new book, An Ecological Guide to the Bush. A big thank you to Bruce for taking the time to join me this evening. And a big thanks to Carol Broomhall, without whom these shows would not happen. And of course, the biggest thank you to Jacana Media for their sponsorship of tonight's prize and the webinar this evening. And that prize is in fact a copy of Bruce's fantastic book. You can enter tonight's competition by filling in your answer to tonight's competition question using the competition link in the chat box. I will post it again after this intro so that you can enter if you missed it earlier. We will select a winner from the entries and contact you tomorrow if you are our lucky recipient. And please note that this is only open to our South African-based viewers. You can connect with us across all our major social media platforms, and you can use the handles on screen or that hashtag conservation conversations to let us know what you think of this evening's show. And just a reminder, BirdLife South Africa is hosting an incredible event in May this year called Flock to the Wilderness. And if you are a birding enthusiast or looking to learn about birds, we highly recommend heading to BirdLife South Africa's website, and you can find out more and book your spot. And if you're not a regular viewer of our Conservation Conversations webinar series, you can join us on Tuesday nights, every second Tuesday at 7 o'clock, where we showcase all things birds, conservation, and birding. You can head over to BirdLife's website to get details about that show, which has just crossed the 125 episode mark. But let me introduce our esteemed guest properly this evening. Dr. Bruce McKenzie is a legend of the plant ecology world, having served extensively as the Executive Director of the Botanical Society of South Africa, with one of his most important contributions being the development of the Bushveld Conservation Unit, which has certainly been a crowning jewel for the organization. Bruce has also worked as a lecturer, both in an academic capacity and as a guide for many years. Bruce has an incredible natural gift to share his passion and knowledge of the natural world, and he does this in a way that leaves all who cross his path with a new appreciation for the interconnectedness of ecosystems and the energy that flows throughout all living things. Welcome, Bruce. If there's anyone you'd like to say hello to or anything you'd like to say to kick us off this evening, the floor is yours. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I am very touched by all the nice things you say about me. And I see the cover of the book is there, and I just hope all the readers find that the inside is better than the cover. You can't judge the book by its cover.
Absolutely.
So thank you for having me, and I'm very happy to be here.
Fantastic. We're so happy to have you with us, Bruce, and what a fantastic cover it is. Certainly looking at that picture, one could just dive straight into the wonderful savanna that we have here in Africa. But to kick us off this evening, there's a famous scene in Disney's The Lion King where Mufasa unpacks the circle of life for Simba, speaking about how when we die, we become the grass and the antelope eat the grass. And at its roots, this is very much an Ecology 101 lesson. But for our listeners who might not know what ecology is or what the role of an ecologist is, would you mind unpacking that a little bit for us just to get going?
Sure. I suppose sort of general answer to that is that it's interactions between and within all the biotic and abiotic elements in a defined ecosystem. I always like to tell people by looking at the roots of words, and the word ecology comes from, I think it's from the Greek, eco meaning house, and logio, which is the language, or if you like, the understanding of the house. And then I always try and introduce another word like economics, which same thing, which is the management of the house. And essentially, when I talk about ecology, I say, well, you cannot manage the house if you do not understand the house. And so I think for those of us who work in ecosystems, we need to understand the house, so those that are responsible for managing it can do so. and in typically, I think related to my book, energy, of course, is of concern to all of us at the moment, and my book focuses on energy, so it's sort of almost appropriate time for filling in that definition.
Absolutely. And yes, etymology of words is always an important thing. And I couldn't agree with you more. Looking at the breakdown of that energy into your book is such a wonderful journey that you take us through. But you've really spent a lifetime working in and researching and teaching about the ecology of South Africa's systems. And obviously in the latter years, you spent a lot of time in the bushveld, which is really what led you on this journey to write this book. And can you give us a bit more insight into why you went about ultimately writing this fantastic book and what you were trying to convey by doing so?
Yes, I never intended writing a book. It was actually mostly, if you like, citizen scientists or the general public, friends and family who spent quite a lot of time in the bush with me actually suggested that I write some ecological notes for them when I suppose when I was not with them on their trips, and I started producing some Roneo notes, and then eventually they said, no, you've got to make this a bit more formal. And then I thought I could combine that approach of considering the general public with students who would be interested in possibly conservation at the beginning of their studies. So that's what sort of encouraged me to write the book. Pretty challenging in the sense that I think the general public publications are referred to as the trade, and of course tertiary education as academic. So the challenge to me was to match those two, not to include too many equations or things like that in the book. At the same time, I had to get sufficient good sound information across to the layman. Anyway, having sort of started that approach and got excited about trying to do something different, which was this approach by looking at trophic levels in the ecosystem, then it was actually I guess Professor Eugene Moll who actually encouraged me to, hey, you need to think about writing a book about it. So that's how it came about, and it sort of developed from there, and I got quite excited about the concept, and luckily Jacana jumped on board, and we're happy to take it forward.
Absolutely. And I think it's such a phenomenal product that you've created. I know so many people, particularly in our audience, who never studied environmental science or didn't do the BSc in ecology, that they maybe wish in latter years that they had, having such a strong passion for environment and nature conservation. And I think your book is such a fantastic, as you say, entry-level tool into really understanding the movement of how energy flows through all things, all living things. And it really is a recommended read if you're someone who has a vague interest in understanding not just the creatures that we all love, be it birds, snakes, anything else within that ecosystem, but really looking at the whole picture and, as you say, understanding the house and how it all fits together. I think it's a fantastic tool. And I'm curious, Bruce, having spent so much time in the bushveld yourself, are there any taxa in particular that are your favorites, and can you tell us why?
You know, I started off after finishing my basic tertiary education on classification, which was, I suppose, more sort of a little bit on the more taxonomic side. But I got frustrated by how many species there were in every genus and so on and so forth. So I don't have a favorite taxa per se, but in the bushveld, there are a few things that excite me in different ways. I love herbivorous mammals, sorry. And Now you asked me the reason why that is, and that is because most of my trips to the bushveld are involved from the seat of a car. And of course, you do see a lot of herbivorous mammals quite often, and there are not too many of them. So you can identify them, and they've got, there's so many exciting things to look at in terms of what they're eating and where do they get their energy from. So that's one of the things that really excite me. I love the smaller things, but I love grasshoppers. They also, of course, are herbivorous, but there are over 1,000 species of grasshoppers in South Africa. So I'm lucky if I could identify 10. So I'm more interested in should we say, where different taxa fit into the trophic level rather than specific taxa. But I don't not enjoy any taxa.
And given that this is a bird life webinar, how do you feel about birds?
Look, I like birds, and I think the advantage about birds is they're colorful. You observe them because they fly past you all the time. I feel the same thing about herbivorous birds, actually, because that part of birding also interests me. And of course, birds, as opposed to a lot of the other taxa, have got many of them have got these beautiful songs. So yes, I do like birds.
Good, that's good to hear. You took an amazing approach when you wrote this book, and obviously you spoke how much you enjoy the interactions of the species and their sort of place within the ecosystem. And earlier you alluded to trophic levels. Can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to take this approach with your chapters of the book and moving through the different trophic levels? And for anybody who doesn't know what a trophic level is, what that all means, please.
Yeah, yes, I suppose in simple terms, one starts off with the plants that get their energy from the sun, then the herbivores that get their energy from the plants, and the plants in turn eaten by animals in the secondary consumer level or secondary trophic level, and then some animals are eaten by other animals higher up the trophic level. And the important thing to me always is that as you go up, there's less and less energy available. So it's not surprising you might miss out on seeing leopards or cheetahs on your visit, because there's less energy available to them than there are, for example, to the zebras further lower down the scale. But I think the other important thing in adopting that approach was what it allowed me, for example, was to separate, if you like, the herbivorous birds into a chapter, and the essentially the predatory birds further down into another chapter, and the same with the insects and the mammals and so on. So instead of presenting a guide that dealt with a chapter on birds, a chapter on insects, I separated them into their, if you like, their feeding levels. So I did that because I think that's the only way you can actually really understand how energy flows through the various components of the system.
Absolutely.
Is that on? Is that what you?
It does 100%. Yes. And I suppose if we were to give an example, we think of something like the red-billed quelea, which is en masse one of the most numerous species on Earth when it comes to birds. Just a huge flux flying across the savanna landscape, darkening the sky, looking like a fluid cloud, versus something like a stick tree bird or a tawny eagle, where you're lucky if you encounter one or two when out on your trip. Do you have any particular bird species that's a favorite for you, Bruce?
Well, I must admit, you mentioned one which is a secondary bird, which
mine too.
I really like. But having said earlier on that I like herbivorous herbivorous level, I suppose I was just trying to think now what herbivorous bird is my particular favorite. Like me, I can't actually think at the moment.
That's all good. We'll forgive you down in the Cape,
Yeah.
far from the beautiful bush. But in your book, you mention a phrase, and I really found this section so interesting. You mentioned the phrase "to eat like a bird," and in your book, you talk about how misleading that can be. Would you mind explaining why you said that the phrase "to eat like a bird" is so misleading?
Yeah, I think as I went through, I suppose, life generally, and in preparing this book, some of these phrases that you learn as a kid or told as a kid come back to make you think. And, I remember the phrase being said, I think probably by my mother, you eat like a bird, which really meant you eat very little. And once I started looking at birds and the amount of energy they need because of the fact that they are endotherms and the fact that they are usually very small, means that they need actually to eat quite a lot. And I'm not sure if I'll get all my facts 100% correct, but I mean, if you compare a dove with a average size human being, you find that the dove will probably eat 15% of its body weight per day. So it doesn't eat very little, where a human being is probably eats something like 2.5% of its body weight per day. So it's a bit of a misnomer and a bit misleading, because actually a bird needs to eat quite a lot. So you might see a bird pecking around on the ground, picking up a odd seed, but they eat a lot of seeds.
Absolutely.
So they actually eat a lot. So in that sense, it's misleading. And they need that energy because they are endotherms, because they are small, and of course, flight is very expensive.
Absolutely. As you were speaking there, I was just thinking of the little willow warbler, a Palearctic migrant weighing very, very little, I think 7 grams in some cases, capable of flying all the way from places like Russia and Europe all the way down here to Southern Africa. And I'm sure any photographer or birder who has tried to keep an eye on that bird in a canopy will know they do not sit still. They are constantly trying to glean insects off of those leaves in the canopies and just on the move all the time, getting food and trying to fuel up as they do those absolutely insane trips around the world. So
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Good.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful creatures, our birds. And you spoke a lot about energetic flow, and I know tonight's competition question is quite an interesting one, and you alluded to some of the similarities that creatures like birds and their distant relatives, the reptiles, may or may not share. Obviously, the two that you picked on were the bird and the crocodile, and they share some very interesting energetic advantages because of some anatomical features. And without giving away too much information, but just to help our audience along with that competition question, would you mind explaining why that gives them such an advantage over things like lizards and snakes?
Basically, let's just take a crocodile for a moment. It is an ectotherm, and I don't know if I need to explain ectotherm. It's
Yeah,
essentially
let's go for it.
those are animals that don't keep a steady body temperature from the food they eat and from metabolism. They warm themselves in the sun or basking on rocks or whatever. And they ectotherms tend to be small organisms. So all your insects, for example, are ectotherms. The crocodile is rather big for an ectotherm, so would struggle. So it would need to have a system that supplies good energy from the food that it does eat to supply its large body. Okay. And if you think about birds, I think I mentioned it already, is the fact that they, on the other hand, are endotherms. They need to eat a lot simply because their metabolic rate is so high, and they need to eat a lot of food, but they also need to make sure that there's sufficient oxygen supply and sufficient a system for moving the blood around the body to the muscles and so on for flight, etc. So that's the importance of those two together. The reptile, other reptile cousins have rather primitive anatomical features regarding the pulmonary and the ventilation system. So I'll leave it at that so people can think about it a bit.
Excellent. And if that wasn't enough for you, there's always Dr. Google, but we'll get everyone out there looking into our crocodiles and our birds and the amazing things they share. And I was up at Victoria Falls towards the end of last year at the Pan-African Ornithological Congress, and I saw some of the biggest crocodiles I've ever seen in my entire life. So they certainly are capable of getting rather large, and I'm sure the energy that it takes to sustain those enormous creatures must require the odd large herbivorous mammal, as you said, to sustain that, and hopefully not too many people along the bank. Unfortunately, I think that might happen occasionally. But I think one of the amazing things that I've always loved about birds, and it's something I've advocated for a lot with the people I've birded with and some of my latter birding lectures, is really the approach of being an ecologist when one birds. And I think birds are such an incredible group of species because they're so highly adapted to different niches within their ecosystems. And here we're very lucky in South Africa. We've got roughly 877 regularly occurring bird species, and all of those have been able to adapt and fill different niches within the broader ecosystems and biomes of South Africa. And that's been something I've really encouraged people to look into, because you can walk into a landscape and just by understanding the features and the ecology in the house, as you described it, that you are standing in, you can immediately start to eliminate certain species of birds that you know just won't take advantage of that sort of system. And it can make you a much stronger birder just by knowing what to expect when you walk into a landscape. And that's not to say the odd rarity won't show up, but it certainly will strengthen one's birding, being able to understand those linkages. I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Yes, I think you're quite right. I've been on a few expeditions with birders, and not being a top birder myself, in fact, I've been on a recent trip, and we stopped, and I had two really, do you call them twitches?
We can call it twitches.
in the front of the car with me, and we were looking at a lark, and they were deciding whether it was, I think, the long beak lark or something else. And one said it's too big to be this, and the other one said too small. And I said, well, I'm not even sure it's a lark, but anyway, it was a lark. But my question to them then was, well, why is the one bigger than the other one anyway? And can you give me any reason why? A larger specimen, how would they adapt to the environment? And that was interesting, because that's really the essence, I think, of what I've tried to do in the book is look at size and shape of different organisms, and sort of to carry on from what you said. I think, just to think a little bit more outside the box when you identify a species, or you looking at a important bird area, is to sort of just look a little bit beyond only the identification, because birds can inform us just as much, I suppose, as many other taxa can.
Absolutely, such important indicator species. And I'm so glad you brought up the lark, because I always teach people in my grasslands course, if you want to understand your LBJs, those little brown jobs, one of the easiest ways to start getting on top of the myriad of similar looking species is to start understanding the kinds of habitats that they look for. If you're after a pale crown testicular, for instance, you have to get to a high altitude steep wetland versus something like a sitting testicular, which is going to be broadly distributed in these open grassland areas. So it really, really can help strengthen one's birding to understand that little line in the book that says habitat that so many people just gloss over and is often very broad. There can be some real niche elements to understanding what a species is after within its broader landscape that gets mentioned in the book. And being able to delve in and tease that apart is such an important skill. And Bruce, birds are obviously these very charismatic and well-loved creatures, and certainly most of the people tuning in this evening are avid bird lovers, but there's certainly lots of other taxa out there. And I know for a lot of people, birds are really the next step after the charismatic big five. And you're driving around Kruger, for example, and start noticing birds are around a little bit more than the leopards and the lions, as you said. And that's slowly how people often get hooked in to becoming birders. But there's so many other taxa out there, dragonflies, butterflies, and various others, plants even. And what are your sort of thoughts around the way your book could potentially bridge getting people out of those silos of big five or birds and looking beyond to that interconnectedness and various other elements of the bush that you try to highlight?
Sure. I suppose in a nutshell, what I have tried to do there is try to get my readers to consider whatever they're looking at or interested in is, well, what actually, or how is the lifestyle of that particular taxa supported by energy, which is essentially the food that they eat. And in that sense, that's what I want people to do, is to look a little bit beyond just the behavior and how long is the gestation period of an elephant, and how many eggs does a guinea fowl produce, and that sort of thing, and how long does a leopard live. And so just consider a little bit more in the quiet moments of what does it take for that animal to live and gain the energy that it needs. And where does that energy come from? And is it going to pass the energy on to anybody else in the system? Does that sort of cover what you were sort of getting to? Or?
No, absolutely. And I think it, as I said, it's such a valuable way of gently getting people into understanding those broader energy flows and ecosystem functions that your book does such a wonderful job of highlighting with very minimal math. So thank you for that. And I know your roots lie in plant ecology, as do mine, and it's certainly a great foundation to have when looking at savannas, that botanical foundation. But how would you say your roots in plant ecology have influenced some of your other natural history observations and the activities you've found yourself involved in over the years?
Sure. You know, I think I got into, I studied biology, which is essentially at UCT, zoology and botany. And as it turned out, surprisingly, I did well enough at third year level to be asked to do honors in both. And I'm not sure exactly why. I think I chose botany because, or plants, because I like the lecturers better. And
that helps.
I had a good friend who was also going to do plants, and we thought there were more jobs in botany. It was at that stage, it wasn't an absolute desire to be a plant-based ecologist, if you like. So that sort of happened by default. But then, you know, after a few years of doing that, you realize, hello, you know, it's a nice studying the base of the ecosystem, where all the energy comes from. But hello, I want to know where this energy goes and how is it used. So I started to look at ecosystems overall, rather than just, you know, the bottom part of the ecosystem, if you like.
Absolutely. Fascinating. And I know I was lucky enough to do my PhD in phenology and understanding the way energy flows through different seasons. And that certainly is such an important part of how animals adapt and move and survive through some of the more leaner time. In your experiences, do you have any sort of recollections of the influence of seasonality on some of your research and your own findings?
I suppose generally I spent quite a lot of time in the Western Cape, which is, you know, in the fynbos environment. And of course, with winter rainfall, it was completely different to really what you get in the bushveld being summer rainfall. So it is really, you know, your base, you get to understand the winter seasons and how it affects the plants, and then whoops, you go off to Namibia or up into the old Transvaal as it was then, and you experience a completely different seasonal thing, and you realize the world is bigger than just the Western Cape.
Don't let anyone hear you say that. Absolutely, but it is, I think we're so blessed here in South Africa. I mean, we're one of 17 mega diverse countries in the world, and that dichotomy we see between the Western Cape and the Transvaal, as you called it, or the Upper Highveld Plateau, is just one of the many reasons we have so many of these incredible biomes, and that's led to this incredible diversity of species taking advantage of those base level vegetative units. And we truly are blessed to be able to live in a country like that, and long may it continue, and long may we preserve those incredible natural spaces. I know you speak a lot in your book about discussions you've had around conservation with friends and colleagues, and the role of humans in that. Would you like to share a few insights with us on sort of what your insights that you gained through your career, and the most important lessons you feel humanity needs to take forward in protecting our wonderful natural heritage here?
Sure. I suppose in general, it's really, it's not how much you know, but it's really is how you interpret things that you do know. Certainly, I was fortunate in having to spend lots of time with I call really solid-based conservationists that on the ground. Jim Feely, for example, I spent 5 years in Transkei with him. He was an exceptional field biologist who certainly early on, and living in an area like Transkei with its largely rural population, influenced me on the need to take the human society side into when you're studying ecosystems. And then also I was fortunate to be with in Namibia with oh God, I'm getting confused now. And also with Professor Moll, who was a great field biologist who encouraged one to get to know the ecosystem in the field, and then knowledge of people. Sorry, the gentleman I was thinking was Dr. Garth Owen Smith, who I was fortunate enough to spend quite a few expeditions with in the drier bushveld. And his insights and the way he looked at the whole system, and the need for authorities to consider the human element in that were really mind-boggling, and influenced the way I thought, and I suppose in the way I actually lectured as well after having those experiences.
Absolutely. It's always important to have those inspiring figures to bounce ideas off of and learn from and be inspired by. And wonderful that you could carry so many of them through in the dedication of your book. I really enjoyed reading that, just to see those who've come before you. And I think it was David Batsovan who really said this book is the perfect testament to standing on the shoulders of giants and seeing how you've grown yourself up from those giants, and you yourself have become a giant in the ecological world and have now laid a foundation for many to come behind you. So well done, and an absolutely incredible thing that you have created, and long may it continue to inspire many of the next generation into ecology and looking at the world in a different way. But sticking with the theme of conservation, obviously BirdLife South Africa being a conservation NGO, we're doing a lot of work in the protected area expansion element of South Africa's conservation estate. And one of the things we did a couple of years ago was to set out important bird areas across South Africa. And we've seen a global move in modern times towards what they're calling key biodiversity areas, very much taking the modus operandi of the important bird areas, or IBAs, where we focused in on very, very important areas for birds, and looking more at the broader ecosystem and the importance of bringing all of those high biodiversity value elements together in what they're now calling KBAs, or key biodiversity areas. And I think that really speaks to this move towards holistic conservation and recognizing the importance of intact ecosystems. And for you, who've spent much of your life looking at an ecosystem level, what are some of your takes on this modern move towards that more holistic conservation space?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical, and in fact, I think the majority of naturally based NGOs are adopting that sort of approach into their general philosophy now. So it's not just about the, for example, I think the Botanical Society, it's not just about identifying the plant species in a particular environment. It's trying to understand the habitat and where the birds fit in, and really understanding the home and the whole ecosystem. So I think that is a change that's coming, or has come. And I think that's very positive, because otherwise one tends to be rather narrow, and I think probably misses out on the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And I think it's just such an important move for our conservation systems, and it's really good to see at all levels, from the highest policy right down to the on the ground guys, taking stock of these intact systems and building those connections, both recognizing the connections within species and the ecosystems, but also that broader landscape. And long may it continue, and may we continue to work towards that new global target of 30 by 30 and conserving 30% of our earth by 2030. We'll certainly be doing our bit as BirdLife, and I'm sure your colleagues back at bushveld are doing theirs. And you had an amazing career with bushveld, and certainly setting up initiatives like the conservation unit and crew, custodians of rare and endangered wildflowers. Just absolutely incredible to see the legacy that those projects have created. Did they end up where you thought they would when you first kicked them off?
I think most of them did end or where I thought they would go. I think when I was there, the idea was when I was with the society, never really wanted to really own all those new initiatives and projects. So once we had started a new initiative, we preferred to hand it on to a authority like Cape Nature or South African National Parks or the South African National Biodiversity Institute to take the project further. So we wanted to initiate and innovate, and then move on to the next thing. But the two you mentioned, crew and what's the other one you mentioned?
The conservation unit.
Yeah, they are moved on well, and crew is still very strong and doing a good job.
Yeah, they absolutely are.
I'm pretty happy with that they're still going, whatever it is, 20 years later now.
No, it's absolutely fantastic. And I think once again, just highlighting how important those citizen science initiatives can be, and really getting that broad interest going and building more support towards conserving our natural landscape. And I think before we start to wrap up tonight's formal interview and move into some of the audience questions, and please, everybody, if you do have questions for Dr. McKenzie this evening, pop them into that Q&A box. I just wanted to talk about termites, because I have fond memories as a young ecology student learning all about these invisible forces that put these protrusions on the landscape and were often not seen, but had such a vital impact on the savanna ecosystem. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about just your take on termites and why they're such a critical feature in this wonderful ecosystem we love called the savanna.
You know, I with termites, for many years, my only really involvement, or I wouldn't say interest, but I suppose really close encounters with termites, was seeing termite mounds in the. It was only really when I started to look at energy in the ecosystem that I said, hey, you know, you got to look at these little creatures in a lot more with a lot more purpose. And termites fascinate me in the sense that they are. I don't know how many termite species there are in South Africa. I think there are about 200 or so. But most of the termites we don't see, in fact, because a lot of them have their nests underground and are not a part of termite mounds. But they are such an important part of the ecosystem, and certainly in terms of the decomposer element. But you know, a termite queen, I think, produces about 30,000 eggs, or can produce about 30,000 eggs a night. And that was quite a relief to me when I thinking, because I just sort of looked at, well, how many termites can an aardvark eat in a night? And that could be, for a 60 kilogram aardvark, about 60,000 or 50,000 termites and ants. So I say, sure. You know, at least the termite queen is if you've got two mounds and the one's not visited by an aardvark, at least the two queens would have produced enough termites for the next generation. So again, in terms of energy, they were very exciting. So they're almost like a key indicator species, and you know, that's why. If you do happen to have pangolins around, they are also good indicator species, because that does mean that there are a lot of termites around, and that means that your system is probably in a reasonably good state. So yeah, termites are really fascinating, and again, I think, you know, for the average person who visits the game, it's more sort of trying to understand their role than necessarily see their role, because you can't see everything that happens certainly from the confines of a motor vehicle, like you could if you're watching zebras or wildebeest or something. So that's why I've included them in my book, and it's a nice little example of that, almost like a part of the cycle of life. You know, the pangolins will eat the termites will eat the dead grass, and recycle the whole thing, and yet they're interdependent. So yeah, I don't know if you want any more information on termites, but
I think we could talk all night about them. Absolutely fascinating group, and such an important food source too, not just for pangolins and aardvarks.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have fond memories at Ndumo Game Reserve camping, and a troop of vervet monkeys came into the camp, and for the first time weren't raiding our tents because the termites were emerging. And I have fantastic memories of these young vervets trying to grab them out the sky with absolute Jackie Chan karate moves, trying to grip these little termites as they came into the world. But wonderful, wonderful creatures, and thank you so much, Bruce, for sharing your insights into them. One of my last questions for you tonight on the formal agenda, Bruce, is really, we recognize Jacana Media. They have such a great selection of authors and natural history writers, and you certainly are worthy of that illustrious title. And they've been growing their natural history genre for a long time and creating some wonderful resources. And I think one of my questions to you really is just, what take-home message would you leave for any of our future authors who may be considering writing a book of their own in the natural history genre, and any tips you'd give them for embarking on that journey?
Sure. The very first one is be strong. It's not easy. Well, just to take from the Jacana motto, which is we publish what we like. I'd say to any prospective person, write what you like, but you need to write about something that you are passionate about. And then secondly, I think the other thing is, don't be scared to take a slightly different slant to what has been done before. So, and once you're passionate about it, then write what you like.
Beautiful. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much, Bruce. And any plans for any future books?
Well, this one's only been out about a month and a half, so I think I first got to actually just reconsider how I need to improve this one. But yes, certainly I do have some ideas, but I haven't actually sort of jumped into it yet.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to those, and I certainly look forward to an ecological guide to the fynbos, because that's a genre that's very far from where I live and would love to learn more. But we've got a question here from Shashi, and she's asking about your energy production at the cellular level, and are there any mitochondrial differences in herbivorous mammals that explains their energy flow and conservation of energy?
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that one straight off. Yeah, with probably actually without doing a little bit of reading myself on that, because that's really at a micro level, which is certainly not my speciality. But I'm sure there are differences, but I couldn't give you any specifics at this stage.
No worries. Thank you for that, Shashi. And if anyone does have any other questions, you've got a few more minutes to pop them into the Q&A box. Bruce, I've absolutely loved this chat. Just hearing your passion for the natural world and your absolutely intrinsic understanding of ecosystem flows and energy flows is really wonderful. And thank you for coming onto the show tonight and sharing all about your wonderful book with us. And as always, a massive thank you to Jacana for making tonight possible. So, Bruce, I'm not seeing any other questions coming through at the moment. Hopefully it's because we've stunned our audience into some new realm of thought that they need to get their heads around. But thank you. And is there anything you'd like to close off with this evening?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to all those people that have been online and listening and so on. And certainly they're more than welcome to pop questions to me after the show. But thanks very much to Jacana and yourselves, BirdLife, for organizing this. And I've surprisingly enjoyed interviews over the last few weeks, which I have done tonight. And thank you for the compliments that you gave me in the course of the interview.
Absolute pleasure, totally deserving, and we certainly enjoyed this. I had a blast this evening, Bruce, so thank you, and I look forward to crossing paths with you when next I'm down in Rondebosch. I'll certainly let you know. I'd love to chat more. But thank you so much, everyone. Don't forget, you can still enter our competition. I'm going to post that link one more time in the chat box, but do head on over to our competition page. I see a couple of you have already. So be sure to answer that very interesting question posed by Bruce. We will pick our winners tomorrow. So I'll give you tonight to do some research. But thank you, Bruce. Thank you to Jacana. And as always, everybody, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We have really, really enjoyed this. We'll be back with conservation conversations on the 7th of February. And I can let you lucky listeners know that we are going to be joined by Steve Woodhall. And he's going to be talking all about the incredible interactions between birds and butterflies. And I think just a great way to come off of this chat this evening, speaking about those intertaxar relationships. So without further ado, Bruce, good night. Thank you so much. And good night to our audience. Keep your eyes on the skies, keep enjoying those birds, and we'll see you back on the 7th of February. Good night, everybody.